Yes. Text 7. Rajo ragatmakam vidhi trishna sanga samudbhavam tannibadnanti kunteya karma sangena dehinam. Oh, the mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti, and because of this one is bound to material fruitive activities. Text 8. Tamastvajnanajang vidhi mohanang sarvadehinam pramadalasya nidrabhis tang nibadnati bharata. O son of Bharata, the mode of ignorance causes the delusion of all living entities. The result of this mode is madness, indolence, and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. Text 9. Sattvam sukhe sanjayati rajakarmani bharata jnanam avritya tu tamah pramade sanjayatyuta. The mode of goodness conditions one to happiness, passion conditions him to the fruits of action, and ignorance to madness. Text 10. Rajastamascha bibhyuya Sattvam bhavati bharata rajasattvam tamaschaiva tamasatvam rajastatha. Sometimes the mode of passion becomes prominent, defeating the mode of goodness, O son of Bharata. And sometimes the mode of goodness defeats passion, and at other times the mode of ignorance defeats goodness and passion. And in this way, there is always competition for supremacy. Text 11. Sarva dvareshu dehismin prakasha upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyad vivriddhang sattvam utyuta. The manifestations of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. Text 12. Would this be the last one, or? Lobha pravrittir arambha karmanang ashamah spriha rajasyatani jayante vividhe bharatarshabha. O chief of the Bharatas, when there is an increase in the mode of passion, the symptoms of great attachment, uncontrollable desire, hankering, and intense endeavor develop. Okay, so we'll go back to text 2. By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature which is like my own. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation, nor disturbed at the time of dissolution. So, what knowledge is Krishna referring to? Well, ultimately, the knowledge of overcoming the three modes of material nature, because that's what the context is of this chapter, the three modes of material nature. Supreme wisdom is how to overcome the modes, and yes, you do this by knowledge of Krishna. But contextually, that's how we understand this. He's referring to how exactly to overcome these obstacles of the three modes of material nature. So, what is it? This similar verse we find, as soon as I read this verse, I was thinking of an earlier verse or point that Krishna was saying earlier in the Bhagavad Gita. There's a similar verse. Anyone knows the famous verse? What's the English? At least say the English. It's in the 4th chapter. Krishna is speaking of knowledge in that chapter, right? Transcendental knowledge. Prabhupada quotes this verse in a different way than the actual Sanskrit, but it has the same meaning. Yes, yes. Janma karma chame devyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mamiti sarjana. Right, Krishna is speaking, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode. So, again, the same principle Krishna is bringing back. Of course, he says this in different parts of the Gita. By understanding Krishna, one can overcome the boat. In this chapter, chapter 4, Krishna talks about the boat of transcendental knowledge, how we can ultimately overcome this material world. So in this chapter, he's going to speak specifically what exactly is this material world that we're overcoming, so that we know clearly the obstacle that we're facing. So, just like Bhagavtam speaks so many things about this material world, but the idea is to know the purpose behind it, which is we understand this world so that we can ultimately overcome it and understand that we don't actually need this material world. This similar line why the impersonalists may also try to understand this material world so that they know what it is, because Brahman to them is everything but this world. So they understand and they study all the scriptures for the sake of understanding what is not Brahman. So they understand what is this world so they can say Brahman is not this. So similarly, but we know Krishna is not like this material world. He's not subject to the modes, the three modes. So we can get an idea of what is real transcendental goodness. Because we're dealing in this material, we're in this material world. So we have to understand this as devotees, these material modes of nature and how they work, because we're in the material modes and we have to deal with them. So, for the sake of dealing with them like devotees deal with them, then we have to understand this chapter. So, this gyan is favorable to bhakti. So, Prabhupada makes the point in this purport. After acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. One does not, however, lose his identity as an individual soul. It is understood from Vedic literature that the liberated souls who have reached the transcendental planets of the spiritual sky always look to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, being engaged in his transcendental loving service. So even after liberation, the devotees do not lose their individual identities. So, Krishna has a transcendental nature, and his nature is not like this material world. In our nature, when we revive our transcendental nature, we'll become like his. Just like we sing in the morning. There's angani yasya sakalim. Was it angani yasya sakalim briyavinti manti pashanti kanti chalam jagantim. So that every one of his limbs can perform the action of any other limbs. The nature of his senses, they're different. They're very powerful. His eyes, he can taste and hear and all these things just by seeing something. So it's not limited like in this material world. It's not conditioned as we're hearing. Everything in this world is conditioned by these three qualities of goodness, passion, in ignorance in a very specific way. But in the spiritual world, it's different. So, Prabhupada goes on. Generally, in the material world, whatever knowledge we get is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. But knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. As soon as one is situated in that transcendental knowledge, he is on the same platform as that Supreme Person. So, those who have no knowledge of the spiritual sky hold that after being freed from material activities of the material form, this spiritual identity becomes formless without variegaedness. So here Prabhupada is referring to the impersonalists. They don't have any real understanding that beyond this world there is transcendental qualities, activities, form, etc. So they perceive this material world is made of the three qualities of the material world. So the spiritual world is nirgun. I mean, it has no such qualities like this. But nirgun means without mundane qualities, or free from the three modes of material nature. So, being freed from this mundane qualities, we can begin our real life. We attain the same qualities of Krishna, which is our original quality. We're all meant to be servants of Krishna. So Krishna is revealing this to us and cutting our ignorance through this chapter to give us an idea that what our real nature is like. It's not like this world. So we have to understand this world so that we can get an idea of what the spiritual world is like. This indirectly. The total material substance. We'll continue reading the next verse. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth. And it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings. So Prabhupada said this one verse right here is the explanation of the whole world, because everything is happening because of the Kshetra and the Kshetragya, the body and the spirit soul, or the material nature and the living entity. So the Lord, we know, Srimad Bhagavtam, it's explained as Lord Shiva actually is the one who comes and impregnates this material world, and all the jivas get put into this material world. So the Lord expands himself into Lord Shiva and touches the material energy and puts the living entities in this material world. So let's continue reading. It should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving Father. So all the species that we see running around, all varieties of life, whether they be trees, squirrels, or different types of birds, or varieties of human beings, all of them are the children of Krishna. So Krishna is revealing this fact to Arjuna. But Prabhupada makes the point that even living entities on other planets, they're also situated, they're all children of Krishna. And this is due to the combination of the material nature and the seed-giving process given by Krishna. So let's continue reading. Material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the living entity comes in contact with nature, he becomes conditioned by these modes. So Krishna is just giving us a quick overview of how living entities come in here. They're first of all impregnated by Krishna, because he's a seed-giving father. And then once they come here, they become conditioned. So prior to that, we know that they were of a different nature. So we need to understand this process. It's a very simple process, but our origin is implied that it's spiritual in constitution. But because we have come in contact with these material nature, that's how we become conditioned. And Prabhupada makes that same point in the first sentence of this purport, that the living entity, because he is transcendental, has nothing originally to do with this. Of course, I'm adding this word original, with this material nature. Still, because he has become conditioned by the material world, he is acting under the spell of the three modes of material nature. And we're induced to act according to this material nature, and therefore there are so many varieties of situations we find ourselves in. So now these modes that we're conditioned by in this world are going to be described. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode develop knowledge, but they become conditioned by the concept of happiness. So there's so many varieties of living entities, and some of them are being influenced by this mode of goodness, their consciousness. So the living entities, what is he's conscious being, and his consciousness is allowed to be, is conditioned based on the type of body he has. And those who are more in goodness, they have more knowledge of how this world works than others. So therefore, they don't perform so many stupid activities that goes against their interest. Because to perform sin or to go against the laws of God it's not good for the living entity. But when one does that, then one will be happy in this world. He will experience some level of happiness. But it will be mixed happiness, because one cannot have absolute happiness in this material world, or uninterrupted happiness. So of course, as one goes higher, in the higher planets, it's more and more goodness. One is developed more and more in the mode of goodness. And he's aware that there is Krishna, there is a Vishnu, the demigods, they're all devotees of Krishna. No one moves up without being a devotee at some level. But still, they're not interested in full surrender to Krishna. Although they're very exalted souls, because they don't perform any sin, because that would be, in general, they don't perform sin. Of course, we know there's exceptions, as Bhagavtam may illustrate. For our elucidation, that this material world is a very precarious position that we find ourselves in. Even if we're situated in the higher planets, where people are very much in the mode of goodness, and understand that there is God, there's no atheists in the heavenly planets, still we can fall down from that position. And the reason is because you experience less suffering there. So you may become proud, just like it's stated in the Srimad Bhagavtam with the Nala, Kuvara and Manigriva. And they became puffed up being these sons of Kuvera. And therefore they were nicely enjoying with some naked women. But Narada Muni came and they were intoxicated. So he cursed them. And they became trees. In whose courtyard? Nanda Maharaj. How very fortunate. Because ultimately they're demigods. So I mean, he can't just curse them out, and not give them some benediction. Because they're ultimately, to get in such a position as the sons of Kuvera, they must be very exalted souls. As we saw when they were rectified, they prayed to Krishna very nicely. They recognized. They weren't like, oh, I didn't know about you. They went in total ignorance. But they were conditioned by this concept of happiness. So we get some idea of what the mode of goodness is. You cannot be sinful and be in the mode of goodness. By the very nature, a good law-abiding citizen is happier than a thief and a criminal. Similarly, those who obey the laws of God to some degree and honor yajna, which is how we heard in the 3rd chapter, right, that this duty or prescribed duties, they're all linked to yajna. That's how everything works in this material world. Whatever is given, how we live and conduct ourselves in this world is all given by God through the scriptures. And that is yajna, is all centered around yajna. And yajna means for the pleasure of Vishnu. Some sacrifices performed ultimately. And that's how we enjoy. Right? The demigods are very pleased for when they see a law-abiding person, because they say, okay, you're using your human life for what it's meant for, so you get the benefits along with that. But those are side benefits. We should not forget that the purpose is not to just enjoy, but to please Vishnu. But there is going to be some side benefits. You cannot enjoy without being sinful. You'll surely get reactions in this life, immediate or next life. But if you get lost in the fruits of your actions, because we learn, again, Krishna revealed this earlier in the Karma Yoga chapter, that every act has some reaction, some fruit will be there. Whether you act piously or impiously, there will be some fruit. But if you get lost and you think, oh, the purpose is the fruit I should enjoy. Now that's why I'm acting in this way. I'm following God and living like this, so I can enjoy and be happy in this world. Then that whole concept is sinful, of trying to enjoy and be in this world. So you lose the whole meaning of yajna, of performing duty, of following dharma. Arjuna was kind of forgetting this. He was thinking, I'm fighting this war so we can enjoy a kingdom. He missed the whole point. That may be, the point is to do your duty for Krishna in this world. Live in this world as a devotee of Krishna, without being attached to whatever fruits you may get. So those who understand this, they're in the mode of goodness. They live a very pious life, understanding that it's in our best interest to follow the laws of God, right? Arjuna was asked, what is best for me, right? Everybody wants to know what's the best for them. So living in the mode of goodness is more favorable. We have more knowledge. But because there's positive fruits of being a pious person, you can be bewildered by happiness that you may get in the mode of goodness. It comes along with it. You have to get, when you're a lawful person, you have to get positive things. Happiness, peace. You won't get reactions. Because it's only pious or sinful. There's no in between. You can have a mix. But when you dissect the mix, you got pious actions and sinful actions in between that. And you're going to get reactions for the sinful things you've done and the pious things you've done. So, and that's the mode of goodness. It's those pious acts. The mode of passion is when you have unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti. And because this one is bound to material activities, fruitive activities. So this is when you're analyzing, none of these modes exist by themselves. So this mode of goodness is tinged in this material with some passion. Because one wants to enjoy, right? That's why he's in this material world. But he does it piously, so he gets some good reaction. But if one is conditioned by passion and mostly ignorance, then he's going to get the wrong reactions. So, but when you analyze passion, the link in those between goodness and ignorance, which is suffering, is this mode of passion. But you can control that by leaning towards the goodness side. If you lean towards the ignorance side, you're going to try to enjoy in a sinful way. And therefore, you're going to get reactions. But either way, what's binding both in goodness and ignorance is this passion. Because they're bound to this material with a desire to enjoy. So when you're understanding this mode neutrally, you understand that this is what actually binds the living entity. And whether they want to enjoy in a good way or in an ignorant way, that's the link between sinful and pious activities. So, and we know Prabhupada always makes this point. The mode of passion is characterized by the attraction between man and woman. This is the pinnacle of happiness in this material world. And it's not even that great. But there's some sanction for this, and one can perform yajna. And one will become purified of these desires by performing yajna. By following prescribed duties, one satisfies the mode of passion, this passionate desires, longings, by performing prescribed duties. Or if one can do it in a sinful way, and the mode of ignorance is there, then one will have to suffer very much. And get purified indirectly by going to hell or becoming a hog or worm and stool, so many things. So, now to understand this next mode, the mode of ignorance causes delusion of all living entities. Every living entity, even those in goodness, they're tinged with some ignorance. Because they're tinged with the concept of trying to be happy without Krishna. They tend to forget this. The demigods forget. They get lost by the happiness, the allurement, the side effects of being a pious person or being a lawful person. Just trying to enjoy the fruits of that. You forget Krishna. You forget the point of it all. That you're meant to serve Him. That those things are meant to facilitate your service towards Him. And actually those things don't even matter, ultimately. Because what matters is a genuine relationship with God. Not this material world or your situation. In fact, devotees are so absorbed in service to God that they're willing to take birth again and again and again. They're only willing to go to the spiritual world if it facilitates their service to Krishna. For the sake of service. Some service is there, they go. Right? The form they take on is because it facilitates more service to Krishna. And what is service is, they facilitate the opportunity to please Krishna. And Krishna is so happy seeing his devotees ecstatic in pleasing him and serving him. And he gets so much pleasure in seeing them happy and serving him. And that's different than any other master you get in this material world. He's satisfied out of his own false ego is satisfied. But Krishna is satisfied because he's seeing you satisfied in serving him. So the result of this mode of ignorance is madness, because especially those who are very much on the bodily platform, they're very much to identify the soul belongs in the spiritual world, is eternal. has nothing to do with these bodily changes. He's identifying this temporary world and becomes so frustrated when everything becomes destroyed, or things don't go against doesn't go according to one's plans. Like Arjuna temporarily was conditioned by this mode. He was forgetting that these persons on the battlefield would not die. Right? Everything you do, if you think you're this body, becomes a big mess, So, one's a mad person. If he doesn't know who he is, right? If someone's sitting next to you on the train or whatever, and he says, and you ask him, hey, who are you? He says, I have no idea. You're going to be like, okay, this guy's a little crazy. Even he has a nice suit on. He's like, I don't know who I am. I have no idea. Seems quite ridiculous. So we don't know whether we're a spirit soul. It's quite ridiculous, actually. How can you live your life not knowing who you are? How can you make any decision, right? If you're going to make a decision of how to live your life, but you don't even know who you are, then what decision will you make? Or if you're going to figure out what is best for you, you don't even know how you live your life. So we can go out and distribute books and say, bro, you don't even know who you are. How are you living your life? How are you going to decide what is best for your life if you don't even know who you are? Like, figure that out first, and then you know what's best for you. And that applies to everybody. It doesn't matter if they're Christian, Jew, Mohammedan, black, white, Christian. Doesn't matter. Do you know who you are? Before you decide what's best for your life or how you should live your life, you should figure that out first. Because if you think you're something you're not, you're going to make some really poor choices about what's best for you, which every living entity wants to know what's best for me. But we have to at least come up to the platform of Krishna consciousness. Indolence and sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. So, just make sure I'm on time. Okay. So, in this mode, we know, because one cannot see things as they are in the mode of ignorance, that's what mad person is, all his choices from that point on will be poor. Even if the person has well intent, because he's ignorant, he doesn't know. He cannot know what is the right thing to do. What is my duty? Or what is best for me? Because he doesn't know. Even if they're well intent. Many of our parents are well intent. And they may cry tears, I call them crocodile tears, useless tears, about how much they care about us, but they're in total tamagun ignorance. They do not know who they are and who you are. And they may say, I love you so much, but it's like, okay, you don't even know who you are. You don't even know the ABCs. How can you help me and decide how I should live my life? Because you're living your life based on the idea that you're some flesh, a bag of bones, stool, and you're going to die, and this is all there is. After this, everything is finished. Everything was born from chemicals, and we don't know what the truth is. That's how you're living your life, and I'm supposed to follow in your footsteps. But you're a mad person. So despite good intentions, if you're in ignorance, you cannot help anyone. You cannot even help yourself. So they're very much controlled. Their decisions about their life is very much influenced by this mode. They're dictated by this. And if you're conditioned by the mode of ignorance, Prabhupada points out, you have to sleep a lot. Or you enjoy sleeping a lot. This dead condition. Right? You're not living. But some people say that's the best part of their life, is sleep. They're so miserable that sleep is the best thing they can do. Some people want to sleep 10 or 12 hours a day. Or they appear very dejected or addicted to different intoxicants or hallucinate. They're not in reality. You know how people, their heads are in the clouds. You know, we say it's like come to measurable reality, but everything is up in the air. You know, they don't stick to plans. Or hey, they don't have any. You can't objectively measure their life. It's like, what did you do? I have no idea. What did you do last week? I have no idea. No idea. I don't know. Wow, so much tamago. So we should live a conscious life, right? That's the idea. A human being is meant for a conscious life. He knows what he's doing and why he's doing it, and what's going to be the result of why he's doing it, right? Even in our devotional service, we shouldn't just shoot arrows in darkness. We should know, why are we spending this much activity on this, or this much activity on that? And what is the goal behind of that activity? We should have some measurable results. So, in summary, the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness, as this verse is summarizing. Passion conditions him to the fruits of action, and ignorance to madness. And then this principle that the modes are actually always changing and competing with each other is illustrated in next text 10. Sometimes the mode of passion becomes prominent, defeating the mode of goodness, O son of Bharata. And sometimes the mode of goodness defeats passion, and at other times the mode of ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there's always competition for supremacy. So this is very important for us to know, because you may think you can overcome the modes by yourself, or the influence of the modes. So Krishna is illustrating that it's very difficult to control the modes of material nature. When you're in this material world, you're in a very precarious position, because the modes are always switching up on us. Their influence is always changing. So, and they're very mixed. Just like we find people who are very clean, but at the same time in some other area they're very dirty, you know. Or like my mother, for example, she's very clean, but she's very ignorant about God. And so it's like, and she's very ignorant that she's not this body, you know. But so it's like the modes are always weird, you know. We find people who have different qualities in so many different ways. So, and we can see how the mode is manifested based on our different activities, because they're objective. You can objectively see how the modes are manifested based on actions, because our nature affects our karma. Our karma means actions, right? So therefore the Vedic culture would take this into consideration. Based on the mode this person is influenced, this most likely the type of actions they would take. So let's regulate those activities by prescribed duties. And therefore, if one is born in this mode, he's a Shudra, he has to act like a Shudra, because that would purify him. If he's a Vaishya, he has to act like a Vaishya, etc., etc. And similar with the different ashrams, depending on the modes that one is, ashram may be more favorable for such a person. And conversely, one also can change his nature by developing certain habits. He can change his nature gradually. It's very difficult to change one's nature, and therefore change one's habits. But it is our bad habits that's preventing us from making advancement in Krishna consciousness. One place, Prabhupada describes anarthas as habits, or bad habits. So if we change all of our habits to pure devotees' habits, then we'll become a pure devotee. But habits go much deeper than just acting with our bodies. They go to acting with our mouths and acting with our thoughts. Therefore, we'll see later on is described as, when it's described how one acts in the mode of goodness later on in the Bhagavad Gita. Because the idea is we have to change our habits, we have to take advantage of the mode of goodness. So, okay, since it's 8:20, we'll stop there. Any quick questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I was just wondering why in the translation to text 3, the Mahat Tattva is called Brahman. I'm wondering, I don't quite understand that.
Yeah, Brahman is a general terminology. So, Brahman, in general, everything is Brahman, right? So, sometimes this material world is called Brahman. The Mahatattva is also called Brahman. Krishna is also Brahman, or the Supreme Brahman. So, yeah, that's why it's total material substance called Brahman. So even living entities are sometimes called Brahman. There's a purport where Prabhupada makes this point. I can't remember the purport, but it's somewhere in the Bhagavad Gita. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Sometimes I can find things like this very quickly. But we'll see if I'm fortunate today. Nope. All right. But in general, Brahman also can mean spiritual, but everything is Brahman, ultimately. Or energy. Sometimes Brahman is described as energy. This energy. So, but then within that, when you want to be more specific, we say this material nature, or the jivas, which are also Brahman. So it's just a general terminology. We have the concept that only the impersonal Brahman is called a Brahman. But no, Krishna is also a Brahman. So you have to understand that contextually, what Brahman is it referring to? Is it this Brahman or that Brahman? Because we're all Brahman. So in this context, it's referring to the material world. In another context, it may refer to another thing. So that's why you have to understand Brahman contextually, because not like the Mayavadis who say they can't understand it contextually. So therefore they say everything is Brahman. Okay? Hare Krishna, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.